Forms, pop-up forms, and buttons provide basic ways for a user to interact with the data in your data sources. They can perform functions like updating, deleting, and inserting a data record, or they can execute any custom function you've already created in internal. So, let's take a look at setting up a form. The first thing that you do with a form is select the data source that you want it to interact with. Here we'll choose our demo database. And you'll see under select a function that a bunch of auto-generated functions have been created, allowing you to delete various records, insert new records, and in this case what we want to do is update a company record. Now the data within the company records is also being shown in the company table here, just so you get an idea of what the values for each of these fields are. And so what we can do is we can give our form a different name. So let's just change this to update company. Now let's go to the field section here where we can set up what we want our form to edit. So let's say we want the user to be able to change the company name here. We can click on this plus and add company name as a new field. Now by clicking into company name, we can choose how we want to determine the value of this field. So the first option is user completes this field. This means that the field is blank to start off with within the form and the user can enter in whatever they like. User completes component field. This is if you want the values for this field to come from a new component like a drop-down or a tag selector. You can go ahead and configure the details for that new component here. The third option is pre-fill with a value from a component. Now this is a common option that you'll be using within internal, and this will allow the values for this field to come from another component like an existing table or another drop-down that you've already created in your space. You can select the component here and then the field that you wish to bind it to. So this is a very common way to make one component interact with another component and can make a better user experience for things like an update form. The next option is to set a custom default value. If you have a fixed value in mind for this field, you can enter it here. The form will be pre-filled with this value, but note that the user can still edit it if they wish. The next option is set a UUID. Internal will generate a unique identifier as the value for this field. This is a helpful option when you're using a form to create a new record and you need a new ID field. The last option you'll see here is set default to null. This field will be set to null by default. This can be handy if you need to pass a null value for a custom function. Now, since we want to update the company name, let's actually pre-fill with a value from the component and then bind it to the companies table and then choose the company name. Now what this does is when a user is using this form, selecting a company in this table will automatically fill in the company name here in the form. Let's also take a look at an example of field types. So to do so, let's say we also want to update the plan that the company is on. Well, let's add a plan field and then let's click in. Now under field type, you can choose various options for how you want this field to appear in your form. In this case, since there's only a couple of different plan types, let's select a drop-down. And we can configure our options like so. First, choose the name that you want to show in the drop-down, and then choose the value that you want to pass along when that option is selected. And you can do that for all of the options. And one other cool thing you can do is, instead of user completes the field, you can also select pre-fill with a value from a component, bind it to the same companies table, this time binding it to the plan. And now the drop-down will start off with the same value that's selected in the table. One other unique option comes up when you're working with date-time fields. Let's add the updated at field here to take a look. So once you click into the updated at field, you'll see that set date and time the button is clicked is a new option here. This will update the field with whatever time it is when the form is submitted, which is useful for updated at fields when you're editing data, or the created at field if you're creating a new record. So let's set that here. And one other thing is, since we no longer need to show this field to the user anymore, since the field will be set automatically, we can make this a hidden field. And lastly, let's go back up to the ID field here. So for functions that update and delete records, you need the ID to specify which record you want to act on. An easy way to do this is to bind the ID field to another component that contains the ID. In this case, we can use the company table here and choose the ID field. And then, similar to updated at, since this is something that we no longer want the user to see and potentially edit, we can make this field hidden. Now let's take a look at our form in action. Let's publish our tool. And now you'll notice that selecting the table row will pre-fill the company name as well as the existing plan. Users can go ahead and edit the company name or select a new plan from the dropdown. And once you hit update, you'll see that your changes have been made and the updated at field updates automatically as well. Alright, from here, let's take a look at how buttons work. Let's go ahead and choose that same data source, and then we'll also have it update a company record. And you'll see that buttons work very similarly to forms, but with one key exception. Since there are no user input fields, all values must be determined through either other component bindings, which you'll see here, custom default values, UUID generation, or in the case of a date-time format field, date-time automatic settings. So these kind of work just like a hidden field in a form. So for our update button, for example, for the ID, let's bind it to an ID coming from the company table. And then let's say we want this button just to change the city to New York. So we'll select a custom default value here and we'll just say New York. And so this button will be New York if I. And you'll see once we publish and try our button out, we first have to select a row and then hit the button, and you'll see that our button works. Lastly, let's quickly cover pop-up forms. Pop-up forms are essentially forms that take the form factor of a button, so they pop up into a complete form once they're clicked. They're a great way to get form functionality into your tool when you don't necessarily want to dedicate all of the screen real estate that is necessary to embed a full form in there. So let's take a look at a quick pop-up form. And let's go ahead and publish this. And you'll see this pop-up form allows us to insert a new company record here. And of course, you can use internals auto-generate UUID to automatically set a new ID here for the new company record instead of allowing a user to enter in something. Well, that's it. Those are the basics of how to use forms, buttons, and pop-up forms in internal.